Something is at the edge of the fire. You see it before you hear it. A low shape in the dark beyond the firelight, pale eyes catching the amber glow. Your grip tightens on whatever is in your hands. You don't move. It doesn't move. And for a long suspended moment, somewhere between threat and curiosity, two species look at each other across a fire that neither one of them fully understands. That moment did not happen once. It happened thousands of times, across thousands of years, on multiple continents, in hundreds of different groups of people who had no knowledge of each other and no shared plan. And out of that long, accidental, mutual experiment came the only other species on Earth that can read your face. How did it actually happen? How did the most effective pack predator in the Northern Hemisphere, an animal capable of bringing down a mammoth, become the creature sleeping at the foot of your bed? The answer will probably surprise you. Let's start with what we know for certain. The oldest confirmed burial of a domestic dog alongside a human being was found near Bonn in western Germany at a location known to archaeologists as Bonn Oberkassel. Dated to approximately 14,000 years ago, the site contained the remains of two humans, an older man and a younger woman, buried together with the bones of a young dog that had clearly been ill for weeks before its death. The dog had survived the severe bout of canine distemper, a disease that should have killed it at around 8 weeks of age. It had been nursed through the illness, fed, kept alive. It survived to approximately 7 months old and then died, and was buried with the people it had lived alongside. This was not a working animal kept at a practical distance. This was someone's dog. The grief of losing it, or the need to keep it close even in death, was real enough to shape how they were all put into the ground, together, 14,000 years ago. But the domestication process began far earlier than Bonn. Gregor Larson, an evolutionary geneticist at the University of Oxford, who has spent years analyzing ancient DNA from dog and wolf remains across Europe and Asia, has found that the genetic split between domestic dogs and their wild wolf ancestors began somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age, before agriculture, before any of the settled human communities we typically associate with the keeping of animals. The ancestor of every dog alive today diverged from an ancient wolf population that no longer exists in its original form. We share our lives with an animal whose wild origin has been erased from the earth for thousands of years. Mietje Germampre, a paleontologist at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, identified possible proto-dog remains at a cave site in Belgium called Goyet Cave, dated to approximately 36,000 years ago. The skull shape of the Goyet canid is distinctly different from the wild wolves of the same period. Shorter snout, wider brain case, different tooth arrangement. Not quite a wolf anymore, not yet a dog. Something in between. Something that had been living near humans long enough for its face to begin to change. So if this process started as far back as 36,000 years ago, how did it begin? Here is where the science becomes genuinely strange. For decades, the dominant story of dog domestication was a human story. Hunters capturing wolf pups, raising them, selecting the most useful individuals, breeding deliberately until something dog-shaped emerged. It's a story that puts humans firmly in control, intentional, managerial, purposeful, and it is almost certainly wrong. Brian Hare, a cognitive scientist at Duke University who has spent his career studying how dogs think and process the world, argues that the first step in domestication was not taken by humans at all. It was taken by wolves, specifically by the wolves that were least afraid of people. Think about what a human camp meant to a wolf living 30,000 years ago. A consistent source of noise, fire, activity, and most importantly, scraps, discarded bones, the remains of a successful hunt. The biological waste of feeding a group of 30 or 40 people was significant, and the wolves calm enough to approach the perimeter of a human camp without fleeing could access those calories without expending any of the energy of hunting for themselves. Fearful wolves fled. Calm wolves stayed and ate. Over generations, the calm wolves had more offspring. Their offspring were calmer still. The camp perimeter became a selection zone, not for size or speed or predatory ability, but for the single trait of tolerating human proximity without panic. Humans didn't choose wolves. Wolves, in a very real sense, chose humans by choosing food and by being the individuals within the population willing to be close enough to get it. The domestication of the dog might have been, at its origin, a story of self-selection driven by scraps. Pat Shipman, a paleoanthropologist and professor emerita at Penn State University, argued that once this early co-tolerance was established, something much more significant followed: a functional hunting partnership. Her research proposes that the emergence of wolf dogs gave early modern humans a meaningful competitive advantage over the Neanderthal populations they coexisted with in Ice Age Europe. A sensory extension that could track by scent through terrain human eyes could not penetrate, that could drive prey toward human hunters, that could alert the group at night before a threat arrived, and that could hold rival predators at bay while humans slept. An animal ally, built across thousands of years of mutual tolerance and incremental trust that fundamentally expanded what a human group could sense, do, and survive. Let's reconstruct what that early relationship actually looked like. A winter camp somewhere in Central Europe, roughly 25,000 years ago. Several wolves, lean, gray, smaller than the apex hunters of the deep wilderness, have been following this group for weeks. Not with them, near them, eating what the group leaves behind, sleeping at a cautious distance from the fire. The humans have noticed. Some have begun to leave scraps deliberately at the camp's edge, not from sentiment, not yet, but because they have observed something useful. When the wolves raise their heads suddenly and orient toward the dark, something is almost always out there. The wolves smell and hear it before any human in the camp does. One morning, a child in the group approaches the nearest wolf slowly, with no particular purpose. The wolf does not flee. It holds its ground, ears low, tail carried down. And then, after a long, still moment, the tail moves, slightly, once. No one plans what comes next. There is no decision made, no policy set. There is just a small hand and a still animal, and a moment that, repeated 10,000 times across 10,000 years in camps across 2 continents, became the dog. Here is the twist that reframes everything you just heard. Your dog is not a tamed wolf. The transformation that produced modern dogs involved such profound and deep biological change in stress hormone regulation, in social cognition, in the orientation of attention itself, that dogs are neurologically a different type of animal than the wolves they descended from. Brian Hare's research has demonstrated that domestic dogs possess an intuitive ability to follow human communicative gestures and read human facial cues, that wolves, even wolves raised by humans from birth in identical conditions, simply do not have. Dogs look at your eyes. Wolves look at what you are holding. That difference, the turn toward the human face instead of the resource, did not come from training. It is not a trick. It emerged across thousands of generations of living alongside people, until the animal was no longer shaped by the wilderness it came from, but by the relationship it had chosen to stay in. A relationship that selected, slowly and without intention, for an animal that wanted the company as much as the food. Something is at the edge of the fire. It has been there for 30,000 years, watching, waiting, moving across an almost unimaginable stretch of time, from the darkness at the edge of the camp into the warmth at its center. Neither planned nor forced, not captured, not conquered, something stranger than both of those things. A slow mutual leaning in, generation after generation, that neither species designed or understood while it was happening. And somewhere in the long middle of that process, without a single moment anyone could have pointed to and named, something entirely new came into being. Not a tamed wolf, something that had chosen to be there.